Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're getting juicy and tackling a fruit that's more than just a lunchbox staple, the apple. Now you might be thinking, apples, what's the big deal? But trust me, there's a whole lot more to these crunchy treats than meets the eye. And we're going to use this Wikipedia article you sent in to really peel back the layers, so to speak. I mean, sure, we all love a good apple pie, but apples are way more versatile than that, right? You've got your ciders, the refreshing kind, and the, well, more adult kind.
Right. And let's not forget about dried apples. Those are a classic for a reason.
Totally. And it's funny you should mention that because I was just thinking about how apples have this long history of being used for way more than just snacking.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
They were a source of sugar before refined sugar was a thing, and a key ingredient in preserving other foods.
Well, that's a good point.
And even as a flavor enhancer in savory dishes like, did you know apples and sausage have been a pairing for centuries?
Sausage and apples. Okay, you've got my attention. But before we go on any culinary adventures, let's take it back to the beginning. Where did apples even come from? Because I have a feeling it's not my local farmer's market.
You're right about that. A lot of people think apples originated in North America, but their roots actually go all the way back to Central Asia. Like we're talking the mountains of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan.
Wow, Central Asia. That's a long way to travel. So are we talking piney wild fruits that barely resemble the apples we have today?
That's the thing. Unlike a lot of fruits that were way smaller in their wild form, wild apples, called Malus sieversii, were actually pretty big, almost as big as the ones we have now.
Seriously. That's fascinating. It makes you wonder how they were discovered and, how they ended up everywhere.
It's quite a story, full of trade routes, empires, even some famous philosophers.
Philosophers. Okay, now I have to hear more about that.
Well, speaking of which,
Mm.
have you ever tried planting an apple seed from, say, your favorite Honeycrisp, hoping to grow your own tree?
Oh, I totally have.
Okay.
Let's just say it wasn't exactly a Honeycrisp that grew. So what's the deal with that?
So apples are what we call extreme heterozygotes, meaning their offspring are super diverse genetically. It's like a genetic lottery. That's where grafting comes in.
Grafting.
Yeah, instead of using seeds, people figured out how to take a cutting from a specific apple variety and attach it to a compatible rootstock. So you get consistent fruit quality.
Ah, that makes sense. And now that you mention it, wasn't there something about Alexander the Great and apple trees?
You're good. The article mentions that Alexander the Great actually sent dwarf apple trees, probably grafted ones, to Aristotle.
No way. That's amazing.
Yeah, it just shows how long humans have been fascinated by this fruit and, really into figuring out how to grow them.
Grafting, Alexander the Great, dwarf apple trees. It's
Mhm.
crazy how much history is tied up in this one fruit. And speaking of history, I'm ready to dive into how the apple has made its mark on, well, everything. Where do we even begin with that?
Well, hold on to your hats because we're going way back, I think 8,000 years back. That's how old some of the apple evidence found in Italy is.
8,000 years. So people have been enjoying apples since forever. What I think is so cool is that through all that time, people figured out ways to make apples a part of their diet even before, modern preservation.
Totally. And get this, Pliny the Elder, the Roman historian, he actually wrote about ways to keep apples fresh.
No way. What, like storing them in a cool, dark place?
Exactly. He suggested well-ventilated rooms, ideally with north-facing windows. And get this, instead of fancy shelves, he recommended storing them on beds of straw or chaff or even mats.
That's brilliant. Those Romans were resourceful. But even with those methods, I imagine keeping apples fresh for the whole year was a challenge. What did they do when apple season was over?
Drying was key, especially in medieval Europe. Imagine rows and rows of apples, cored, peeled, and all strung up to dry, either whole or sliced into rings.
Okay, now I'm seriously craving dried apples. But it's true. It makes you appreciate how important something as simple as drying food was. Can't forget about the bees, though. Those little guys are essential for apples, right?
Absolutely, our buzzing buddies. Honeybees and mason bees, they're both crucial for pollinating apple blossoms. Without them, we wouldn't have nearly as many apples.
It's like this perfectly choreographed dance bees going from flower to flower, spreading pollen, and making sure we have apple trees.
Exactly, and this is where it gets really interesting. Not all apple varieties can pollinate each other. They have these things called pollination groups,
Yeah.
and they need pollen from a compatible variety within a specific time to actually produce fruit.
So it's not just about having any bee buzzing around. It's got to be the right bees at the right time with the right apple varieties nearby.
Wow, that's incredible. This delicate balance orchestrated by nature, and then, humans have been figuring it out and managing it for centuries. Okay, but We have to talk about the apple's cultural impact too, right?
Yeah.
Because that's huge.
Oh, absolutely. Apples are everywhere. Mythology, religion, folklore. And they almost always have a deeper meaning.
It's true. Art, literature, you name it. But what's so interesting is how the apple's symbolism seems to change depending on the culture, right?
Exactly. Take Norse mythology, for example. They had Idun, this goddess, who guarded these magical apples that would, like, give you youthfulness.
Hmm.
But then in Greek mythology, apples are tied to, like, conflict and competition. Think about the golden apples of the Hesperides, the ones Hercules went after. Oh, right. And of course, there's Adam and Eve and that apple, the forbidden fruit from the Garden of Eden. Talk about symbolism, knowledge, temptation, the fall of man.
It's incredible. It really is just a fruit, but it's become this super powerful symbol across cultures.
And it's not just ancient myths and stories. Even today, the apple still holds so much cultural significance. Like, take the saying, an apple a day keeps the doctor away.
Classic. And, while it's not a guarantee for perfect health, it does show how long apples have been linked to wellness. What's funny is that saying can actually be traced back to 19th century Wales.
Wales. Really, I always thought it was an American thing.
Right. It just shows how these things can evolve and travel. The original saying was, eat an apple on going to bed, and you'll keep the doctor from earning his bread.
I kind of love that. It's got a nice ring to it. But speaking of health, as much as apples are good for you, there are some people who can't really enjoy them, right?
You're talking about people with allergies, specifically birch apple syndrome.
Yeah, exactly. I read about that in the article, and it's just crazy how something as harmless as an apple can cause, like, a serious reaction in some people.
It really shows how complex our relationship with food can be. Basically, birch apple syndrome is an allergic reaction to a protein in apples that's similar to one found in birch pollen.
So if you're allergic to birch pollen,
You might have a reaction, sometimes a really bad one, to raw apples.
wow. So it's not just a myth. Some people really can't eat apples. That's wild. It really makes you appreciate all the science behind food allergies. It's amazing how much there is to learn about apples. But with all this talk about history and culture, I'm kind of curious about the future of apples, too. I know the article mentions something about genetically modified apples.
Oh, yeah. Arctic apples, they're genetically engineered so they don't brown.
Wait, what?
Seriously. Imagine, like, perfectly crisp white apple slices, even after they've been cut. No more brown, mushy apples.
That sounds like magic. How does that even work?
It's actually really cool. Scientists figured out how to, like, silence the gene that causes browning. So the reaction that makes them turn brown just doesn't happen.
Wow, that's incredible. So they stay fresh longer, look better, less food waste, too.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder what other kind of cool innovations are coming when it comes to something as, basic as an apple.
Totally. And it's not just the apples themselves, right?
Yeah.
Think about what this could mean for, like, the whole food industry. Less food waste, lower transportation costs, maybe even making other fruits and veggies last longer.
That's a really good point. It's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time to be thinking about the future of food.
Going through all this, the history, the science, the cultural stuff, it's really clear that the apple is more than just a fruit. It's this symbol, this source of food, and like you said, a testament to how clever people are.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
It just goes to show you, even the most ordinary things can be super complex and interesting when you really dig into them.
Seriously. A huge thank you to our expert for guiding us through this deep dive into all things apples. It's been amazing. And to everyone listening, if you want even more apple-y goodness, definitely check out the full Wikipedia article. There's so much more to explore. Who knows? Maybe you'll be inspired to try a new apple variety or get adventurous in the kitchen. Until next time, happy learning.